Guess who has this charm on his keychain? Well, hey there, welcome back. Guess who has this charm on his keychain? We're continuing our series on states of being. Today's state of being is system thinker. And again, before we go on, the point of these episodes is not to just focus on what we think are ailments or diseases or disabilities. It's about a bigger picture for people. And we take a step above that and say, well, what else is there out there that kind of frames the way that someone thinks and behaves and sees the world and perceives things? If you've heard the other episodes, you've found that even things that people think are disabilities are very empowering in some ways. And the opposite is also true. Things that people think are just some sort of superpower also have a downside, because everything has two sides. With that, I bring you to systems thinking. If you've followed me for a while, you know that that's the core of what I do and who I am. It's the lens I look through. It's the measuring stick I use when I see, hear, feel, touch everything. I start to see the system, whether I want to or not. In much the same way that a hypersensitive person is bothered by sound or a certain kind of light, or someone with OCD really wants to focus on making sure things are just not only turned off, but in the right order. I don't really turn off thinking in systems. If you think in systems and it's been brought to your attention and you've tried it, or maybe it's a core of who you are, then you know what I'm talking about. So what is systems thinking? Systems thinking is seeing something as, obviously, a system, as a number of parts that work together with a set of rules and functions and so forth. You look at the engine in a car, that's a system. All those parts are important and they all work together. They can all be adjusted. They all have inefficiencies and so forth. I'm going to shorten that because I want to jump to the reality of systems thinking. The reality of systems thinking is quite amazing. The way your business operates is a system. The way that you operate is a system. If you want to lose weight, you don't just do one thing. You see it all as a system. If you try to do that one thing, whether you see it as a system or not, the system is what processes what you try to do. You're messing with the system. If you're trying to get a promotion at work, you have to deal with the system in place for promotions. If you're trying to sell something to a client, you have to deal with their system in place for accepting new orders and changing the way that they do business. If you want to build an app, you have to deal with a system and, in fact, go so far as to choose a system. And the reality of it is that a lot of these systems are very solid and rigid and in place because of fear or because they always were this way, and we never really questioned it, did we? People see the system as something much greater than them, just like when we talk about a business. Well, my company won't let me do that. Is it your company? Or is it a rule? Is it HR? Is it a particular person? Is it an infrastructure? And those are all kind of part of the system. If your company tends to hire the same kind of people, let's say you have a company that continues to attract toxic people, regardless of what their skills are, there is a system in place enabling that. And more so, not just enabling it, but promoting it. Every unit has a system in place, whether it's the psychology of how you think, the biology of the way your body functions, and even your family unit. What flies in your family might not work in another family unit. There's even a system in place for dating. What a great segue to my experience with systems. As a self-proclaimed systems person, I tell the world that I see systems in everything. And I continue to build systems, to distill things into a system, and to explain things to people as systems. And then I go so far as to actually help people change and get the things that they want through a system I created. When I wrote my first book, The Status Game, there's a pause there because I was going to say one. The first status game book, just called The Status Game. That was when I started to see a system in place of status for relationships. And it wasn't just relationships of the romantic kind. There were more than that. But when I wrote the book, I immediately realized the foundation, or rather the system that I had discovered. And I expanded on that with the Status Game 2, and recently the Status Game 3 Beyond Status, which should be out in 2025. When I started this podcast, I saw a system, and my first review, I think, said I really hit the ground running, and I really appreciated that, because I wanted to see what made a good podcast. So looking into that and sort of seeing that system, I wanted to follow a format that seemed to make sense for me, and that's when I decided on the 10-minute format for episodes like this, and the 1-hour maximum format for when I do interviews. When I wrote the book One Self, Have Faith in Yourself, I wrote a rather lengthy, sort of tongue-in-cheek book about seeing the system of spirituality, religion, and lack thereof. When I created my coaching, I actually created 2 separate systems. I created the conceptual system of how the coaching should work, breaking life into time, energy, and resources, applying it to 5 facets, and moving on from there. The other system was the one I programmatically created. Being a full-stack web developer, whatever that is, I created a system online that people can log into, that we can map things out visually and have a chat and have all that great stuff. 2 systems for one system. When I branched out into fiction, I realized there was a system there too. There were essentially 3 aspects to writing fiction. And if you focus on the correct facet when it's needed, you do not encounter writer's block. And I ended up making a few talks and seminars on that. Found the same thing for nonfiction, that it's a hierarchical arrangement of thoughts. As I like to say, as much as my mouth doesn't want to, it's very true. The problem with seeing systems and everything is that sometimes you see things you don't want to see. I mean, anything that you're involved in on a fairly intimate level, where you've had to be very involved, push yourself to be involved, and what have you, sometimes pulling the curtain aside can get in the way of your enjoyment, or it can get in the way of you seeing things like the standard normal person. This is how this is similar to some of the other states of being, in which you're kind of in your own bubble seeing things one way and everyone else is saying, oh, look how pretty. Or I'm sure I'll get that promotion. Or I really think she likes me. While you see things for as they are. Because when you understand the system, you realize that the system doesn't allow for just randomness unless there's a hole in the system. I never ever believed that people dressed up as animals and cartoon characters were anything but people dressed up as animals and cartoon characters, regardless of how young I was. I never saw that. I never wanted to walk up to one of them and shake their hand because I thought, why do you have that on? Why are you wearing that? I saw this system in place that allowed for adults to wear costumes and interact with children in certain ways. I saw the system that allowed people to hand things to them or have them hand things to them because they couldn't quite see through the outfit. I just saw it. Can you turn it off? Well, sort of, right? I mean, like anything else, if you focus on what's important, I mean, obviously, if you're focused on a relationship or something, you're not going to be saying, well, you know, the system in place that allows us to, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You're not going to have that because you're going to be focused on the person and the friendship and the company and the creativity and so forth. It's the same thing when I record this podcast. I have a format of basically 4 items I go through specific to the charms, but I want to have the freedom to speak to you conversationally, and that's what I think about. I don't think about the system. So like anything, control, awareness, and moderation is really what keeps us human. And I guess that's the coping part of being a systems thinker, is just letting go sometimes and just saying, I get that there's a system in place for this. I get that there's a system in place for this fancy restaurant and the way that they deliver things and the forks and the knives and so forth. But I just want to have a steak, and I'm going to. So the systems charm. The system charm, the design I chose for this systems charm was a gear, because it made sense, because when we think of gears, we don't think of a single gear. We think of this gear as being part of many gears, just like we say we are but a cog in the machine, right? The machine being the system. As with the other charms, this charm can remind you to be or to not to be. That is not the question. So the gear can remind you to continue to focus on systems, because focusing on systems could be what has saved you in the past. It could be that thing that's allowed you to lose weight or to get fit or to get healthy or to break out of a toxic relationship. It can remind you to get out of the trenches, stop being reactionary, and look and say, this is all part of a thing. This is why I keep reacting this way, and I'm going to do this over and over again. Or it can remind you in business to look at the systems. It can remind you in sales and so forth to look at the system in place. It's an extremely powerful charm. It can also remind you to do the opposite. As I just said, it can remind you to stop looking at the system and smell the roses and enjoy life, enjoy your loved ones, enjoy your relationships and family and so forth. If systems thinking isn't your thing, the alternate things that you can do with this charm is to sort of say, hey, I like machinery. I'm a machine head. I'm a gear head, quite literally. I am someone who likes working on cars. I am somebody who's mechanically inclined and quite proud of it, and it works well in my relationship. I'm a machinist. I went to a trade school, which between you and I is much undervalued today. It is something that is extremely valuable, extremely needed in the system of civilization, and for a long time we undervalued people who just got out of high school and just got to work, and I applaud you. So that's the systems thinking charm. I hope you enjoyed it, and as I've said with all the charms, whether you grab one or not, and they do come in really cool colors, come on. You are seen. You're seen by me, and you're seen by you. So, take care.
Living life, every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.
Do you have a story to share or a question? If your idea makes it to a podcast, you'll receive a shout out as well as a token of my appreciation. Join the community, patreon.com/alchemy for life.
All I need are some better days.